Game over, man. Game over.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
I am Iron Man. This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for November 17th, 2025, and I'm Jada Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, for this conversation. Brendan, what should we set the over-under as far as hashtag JD Tears is concerned? Maybe around 3.
I'm not making any bets. I'm not playing that game. I feel like it's a losing game regardless.
It could be. I will say this. I do feel like I got it out of my system earlier today as I was prepping for this conversation. I did have a bit of an emotional wallop as I was gathering my notes, but I feel much better now. I feel like I have purged those emotions. We'll see if they arise during the review.
If that's not an indicator as to how GD feels about this movie, then I don't know what is.
Look, I have not been shy about it on social media. So,
well,
I mean,
maybe
look,
some people don't follow you on social media. Maybe they
might
only
not.
listen to us here, and you've already just played your card, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there's no beating around the bush with it. I have been quite vocal about it. Maybe you have just found us randomly on YouTube or on Apple or Spotify. However, you have found us, welcome. We do hope you enjoy the conversation. And maybe I am playing my cards a little bit here to begin with, but once I get into my thoughts, it's not going to take long for that I'm not going to be shy about it.
we often joke about how we sometimes play our cards too early for films that we're passionate about, but we shouldn't be as interested in that. We're more interested in the why of certain feelings, right? Like, we're not here to make any grand reveals or anything about how we feel about a movie. Sometimes we do that because it can be fun for certain types of movies, right? But other times we're just simply more interested in, hey, we really like this, and we want you to understand why we come from this side of the coin.
Yeah, and the experience of watching this film was also quite interesting. Obviously, we are here to talk about Chloé Zhao's new film, Hamnet, which premiered at Telluride earlier in the year, and pretty much every festival that it played at, it swept. I don't think it won every single one, but close to every single festival that it was at won. So this is going to be a major awards player this year. And if you paid attention to the festival circuit at all, you know what you're walking into, that this is going to be a hefty emotional experience. Of course, if you know anything about William Shakespeare and his personal life, that might be an indication as well. The synopsis to this film has not been subtle. It's not been trying to hide what this film is about. It is not First Man. And that is a film that I will always cherish, because First Man did not market itself as a movie about grief. I did not know what I was walking into when I first saw that film, and it was this huge surprise. I didn't know anything about Neil Armstrong or his personal life, so that was quite the adventure. Hamnet has not been hiding that it is about the tragic death of William Shakespeare and Agnes Shakespeare, their 11-year-old son, Hamnet, famously. So I, at the very least, knew what I was walking into. And because I knew what I was walking into, I told my family, look, I have to lock myself away. And I am deeply deeply grateful to Focus Features that I was able to get a screener to this.
Yeah, I was
I
just
don't
going to say
know-
the beauty of a screener for being a film critic. You
Yeah.
got so lucky with this one.
Look, I would have loved to see this in a theater. I don't know what other cinephiles or critics will think of this. I know it might be a little blasphemous, but I have said forever now that I was dreading seeing this in a theater because I knew, or at least I had a presumption as to what it would do to me. And I didn't want to have that reaction in a public space like that. Not just because of how potentially embarrassing I could, look to other people. That was not my concern as much as it was I would be a distraction to everyone else.
There's
in
a
the
line.
theater.
There's a line, right? There's a line that when you get so emotionally involved in a movie in the theater to the point that you're audibly, crying during it. On one hand, it could be, oh, this individual is really engaged with the movie. But if it gets to a certain point, like the way you're describing, GD, you're either a distraction or people think that you're severely ill and they have to call somebody.
Exactly. And again, I don't want to play my cards too early, although I have. So who am I kidding? But
JD hates this movie.
let's just say that I made the right decision because I would have absolutely been a distraction to someone else, or someone would have called an ambulance or a family member. My wife would have had to come get me. I don't know, because people would have been concerned. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, people
So
would have probably thought you were having a seizure or something like that. And I say that with respect. I don't mean that to be disrespectful to anyone who's epileptic out there. But you probably would have been convincing other people that you had to be called, to the doctor or something like that.
It was like, so I told my family, I'm going to create a setup in the office. I have a nice TV in there, nice surround sound. And I was able to just have the space to myself for 2 hours, a little north of 2 hours. And I just had to lock myself away. I had to give myself fully to the film in a nice, quiet space all to myself. And I'm really, really happy I made that decision.
Well, now my question is this, JD. You gave yourself 2 hours, which is the length of the movie, not including end credits. Did you actually give yourself maybe 3 hours so you can just sit there for an hour and kind of walk in it?
No. And I don't know if I should tell this story now or at the end. Maybe I should just tell this story now.
I didn't mean to set you up in that way. So
Yes.
if you want to save it later, we can.
I don't know. Because I don't once we get into the conversation, I don't want to move away or get distracted necessarily. I'll bring this up now, and in context, it'll probably carry more weight later. But I did not give myself extra time because I watched this later in the evening. My son, however, my 10-year-old son, that is also important to this story.
Yeah.
My 10-year-old son is still up playing video games, having a grand old time. Now, he knew that I was watching this, much like my wife. He was aware of me locking myself away, that I was going to have this emotional experience. He knew that I was going to have some sort of emotional reaction. Now, he didn't know what I was watching or the depths of the film or the grief that was on display, but he knew that I was going to be emotional for a little while. So as soon as the movie ends, I will say, to your point, I at least gave myself through the end credits all the way to the very end.
Okay, so you gave yourself 5 minutes.
Yes, about an extra 5 minutes or so. And then I go out into the living room where my son is, and I put my headphones away, and I just kind of gather all my belongings, and I go to take him to bed because it's quite late at this point.
Sure.
And we get to his room, and the first thing that he asked me was, "So, how was the movie?" And again, if you know what this film is about, have you ever seen that GIF on social media of Vince McMahon getting emotional during the interview?
Oh yeah,
And for the audio listeners out there, the one where he's getting emotional and waving his hand like, I got to stop the interview here.
it's a classic GIF.
That was more or less verbatim my reaction at the moment. Like, I could not answer that. All I did is I gave him the biggest, to him probably most awkward hug of his entire life to this point. And I just laid there with him as he went to sleep. And it was the most peaceful sleep I have ever had. You know, that sleep when you've been crying for so long that the salt and the tears have created this residue over your face. So you just, your eyes literally can't stay open any longer.
Yeah, it's
I had
everything
the best
just feels so
sleep of my life,
dry.
I'll just say that.
Yeah, I get it. I get it.
Yeah. And in a lot of ways, physically, I still feel like I'm feeling the effects of it a little bit, even now, a few days later. So.
I don't know. We'll see how this conversation goes, because right now it seems like you may have cried yourself dry.
Yeah. Yeah, very possible. And like I said earlier today, any leftover tear ducts that were left, they were expunged. So I don't know if I have anything left in the tank, but we'll see how this conversation goes. So who knows? All right. With that laid out, I don't know if there's anything else we need to say. We love Chloé Zhao as a filmmaker. Jessie, Buckley, Paul Mescal, two of our faves as well.
Yeah, we'll talk about them, but we'll also talk about a few others that are very important.
Indeed. Okay, let's go ahead and jump into this. Hamnet is directed by the great Chloé Zhao. It stars Jessie Buckley, Paul Mescal, Emily Watson, Joe Alwyn, Jacoby Jupe, David Wilmot, Olivia Lines, not exactly sure how to pronounce her name, so forgive me there. And a few others that come and go throughout the film. Maybe we should also denote that Noah Jupe also has a small role at the end of this film as well.
Significant role, significant casting of that role too.
Yeah. Perhaps we will talk about it. And maybe just a fair warning up front for spoilers. I think I can get through my opening thoughts without getting into spoilers, but most of this conversation, I want to be flexible in where it goes.
Yeah, and it's also one of those movies that I mean, I guess the specifics of what we'll talk about will definitely seem spoiler-like, but there is a historical angle to this movie that makes it, I guess, maybe more fair to talk about the details than, let's say, some other work of fiction, for instance.
And that's exactly because, as I noted earlier, the film is about the tragic death, of Hamnet at 11 years old. That is what this movie is about.
Yeah.
So there's, as far as spoilers are concerned, from a plotting perspective, it doesn't really go much beyond that. Obviously, there's a ton of details that complement said synopsis, and we'll get into those, but I just want to have the flexibility to really get into the details here. I think it's important for this conversation.
But having said that too, there's a lot that we'll talk about here. The details specifically that may or may not be historical fact, because there's just not enough documentation to prove whether it is or not. A lot of this is speculative on Maggie O'Farrell and her book from the year 2020, which I have not read. I hear it is very good.
Yes.
But a lot of this is speculation as to how someone like a William Shakespeare would internalize this level of grief for their art. But we do know but the death itself was fact.
Yes. And those details are important to this conversation. So I don't want to handcuff ourselves around that. That's going to be vital to a lot of what we get into here. So again, I know this film is making the rounds. So a lot of people, or at least some people listening to this, might not have seen it yet. Again, we will get through our opening thoughts without getting into too many details. But once we get beyond those opening thoughts, I just want to throw a warning out there, just in case. Okay. I guess I will read the official synopsis here as well.
Just to lay the IMDb related groundwork here. We always do that.
We always do. A powerful story of love and loss that inspired the creation of Shakespeare's timeless masterpiece, Hamlet. And that is the murky, pseudo-factual basis of this film that Brennan was just laying out there. So funny enough, you set up the IMDb synopsis very well. Yeah. We don't know, historians don't know for sure, but maybe it was inspired in some way. Yeah. Again, that's going to be a big part of the conversation. We'll get into it. All right. With all of that said, Brendan, what did you think about Hamnet?
Well, all this movie had to do was make you as an audience member believe that could have been the historical truth as to how William Shakespeare created his tragedy, Hamlet. That's all the movie had to do, and I think it succeeds in that regard. So if you're listening to this review and all you want to know from us, should I go see it? We say yes. So that's the short version of this review. Now we can get into the details here. I do think it's pretty interesting, JD, that earlier in this conversation you brought up First Man and how this movie is really not First Man at all. And a lot of that really is due to the marketing, because First Man...
And that's what I mean mostly, is from a marketing perspective.
Because I think when the dust settles and we can see this movie for what it is, and now that we've had some time to see First Man for what it was, I was thinking a lot about First Man.
No, thematically, structurally, it's very much First Man.
It absolutely is.
Yes.
What I love about both of these movies, and this might sound like a backhanded compliment, and it's not meant to. It's actually something I really like about this movie, is that I don't necessarily see this as maybe the most philosophically dense depiction of grief and loss as it relates to art. I mean, if you want that version, you can watch Sentimental Value from earlier this year.
Sure.
I think that's that example of that, and I think that movie's great for those reasons. Sometimes a movie's job, when it's detailing these types of themes, it's just designed to make you feel something. And that's what this movie does. That is its priority, and I think it really does mostly succeed in that regard, primarily because of these performances, primarily because of the material itself. And I think Chloé Zhao's direction is very sincere in portraying those things. And I did mention the performances already. We'll talk about Jessie, Buckley, and Paul Mescal, I'm sure. I want to highlight Jacoby Jupe, which I'm sure we'll talk about him a lot during this conversation. He's terrific in this. Absolutely terrific in this. I don't know if this is my favorite movie of the year or if it's quite in that conversation. There's one thing about it that I'm still wrestling with. We'll get to that part later. I won't talk about that yet because I could tell JD is itching to talk about why this movie is...
I'm trying to hide it so much. I'm failing miserably.
This is a perfect advertisement for those listening. You really should be watching on YouTube on occasion because sometimes we have things caught on camera that you just can't capture on a lone microphone. And this is one of those times. JD looks adorable right now. He's clearly very passionate about this movie, maybe even more so than I am. But I do think he's just relieved to hear that I didn't dislike it. I do think it's a very good movie.
Sure.
So
would have been a harder conversation.
I know it would have. Yeah. I'll toss it back over to you, JD.
Well, I mean, certainly love hearing what you're saying there, but also as we got into it, I was quite composed during the opening, but then we get into the actual movie and you start talking about some of these actors and what makes the film so compelling, and like a wave,
you're back
came to me so hard. I was really trying to hold my emotion that whole time.
You know, I made a mistake, JD. I should not have said the name Jacoby Jupe so early.
That was it. That was really what the turning point there for sure.
That's my bad. I'm sorry.
But we have to get into it. I'm going to have to apologize up front. There are probably going to be a few times here where I embarrass myself as we talk about this movie, because this did destroy me in ways that's almost hard to articulate. Really, really hard to articulate. I have not been stung this hard since the aforementioned First Man in 2018, maybe even since I first saw Grave of the Fireflies some years ago now.
It's high praise, man.
And yes, the film is absolutely devastating, but what I really love about Hamnet is that it's so much more than just a movie about grief and loss. It is equally interested in life, in love, in family, and the deep power of art as a means of healing. As we've already talked about, we don't know for certain if Hamlet was inspired at all by the death of Hamnet, although many scholars have theorized that it's at least partially inspired. But either way, this film unequivocally buys that idea and essentially infers that Hamlet is, in many ways, Shakespeare's The Fablemans, a tragedy born out of a tragedy, with art becoming the nucleus for hope and healing. It's one of my very favorite tropes in film, and I was equally floored by how this film denotes art as a profound mechanism for catharsis. I absolutely want to talk more about the ending to this film as we go, but what those final moments signify for William and for Anne together, but also individually, is utterly beautiful and endlessly poignant. Similarly, I deeply love what this film does with Hamnet, the character Hamnet, and how it denotes his relationship with his twin sister Judith.
Oh, yeah.
The symbolism behind his quote-unquote sacrifice, which I'm sure we'll get into later as we go here as well. But the symbolism behind that could be seen as heavy-handed, but I find it remarkably human and compassionate. And I think it works because of how the film builds to it, beginning with the birth of Judith and Hamnet, a sequence I absolutely have to get into as well. But also we find out that Judith is vulnerable to disease. And there's a great moment where William tells Hamnet that he needs to be brave while he goes off to London. So there is a lot of foreshadowing going on. I don't think Zhao is hiding from it at all. She is very clearly leaning into that foreshadowing as a way of giving credence to Hamnet's choices when he sees that Judith is on her deathbed. And because the film is operating on a very symbolic plane to begin with, it makes sense that Chloé Zhao would depict those scenes in that manner with so much visual storytelling that is fundamentally driving so much of what's going on here, which is why, on that same token, I don't have an issue with the screenplay here because of that visual storytelling. It might not be as thorough or as dense as you noted earlier, some other films about grief, but I was absolutely riveted by how this film unfolds with that visual storytelling propelling everything, especially because of these performances. Jessie Buckley ripped my heart out. Absolutely ripped it out. She has a habit of doing that, by the way. I don't know why she keeps doing that, but my goodness, does she have a hold of my heart as it's outside of my chest.
It's like every time we see an actress like Eliza Scanlon on a beach, you know you're going to cry, right?
Yes.
It's like anytime you see Jessie Buckley in any type of movie, you're probably going to cry.
Absolutely kills me, but man, is she good here. Might be a career best performance. Paul Mescal is phenomenal. He is quickly becoming one of the best working today. Jacoby Jupe, as you noted, one of the best child performances of maybe the last 10, 15 years. I don't know. He is stupendous in this film. Absolutely remarkable. Again, it's hard to put into words. I was a mess when watching this, like audibly sobbing. I was at a point where, and it's been years since I've felt this way, but literally cried myself to sleep in a sense. Like I was so exhausted after watching this. And I say this very complimentary, by the way. In fact, I think maybe the best way to articulate it is our good friend Danny from the Rolling Tape. God bless Danny. But he tweeted me and said something to the effect of, it's the best cry you'll ever cry. And
it's cute. Yeah.
I don't know if I could say it any better than that. Like it was extremely satisfying to be so exhausted at the end of this film, given its emotional prowess. And as you somewhat noted earlier, that is the aim of this film. That is its main goal. And I think it accomplishes that to an extraordinary feat.
It's been a really good year for child performances because you have Jacoby Jupe in this movie who, at the very least, I was about to make a very hyperbolic statement. I think I'll hold on that. But at the very least, he's the standout for me in Hamnet, which is not to undersell anyone else, but I do think he is quite terrific here. But he's also in great company with someone like Alfie Williams from 28 Years Later earlier this year.
Also very, very good.
Yeah. It's quite a few other child performances that I know I'm blanking on. The young actor at the end of Weapons I thought was quite good too. So I'm just blanking on his name. So it's been a very effective year in that regard. But Jacoby Jupe gives one of the best performances of the year, I think. I really do think it's that good. Obviously, Jessie Buckley and Paul Mescal can also join that conversation in their own way, but Jacoby Jupe has to make you fully accept the metaphorical obviousness of this movie, which you were talking about. The whole notion of Hamnet and Judith as twins who many times over would switch places with each other, sometimes as a joke to trick their father, as kids would sometimes play to do. You know, that's what twins usually do to their parents, right?
Yeah.
The birth itself is literally an act of switching places. And then the sacrificial act that you alluded to is an act of switching places. Something that twins often do. And as obvious as it is, a performance like Jacoby Jupe's has to make you be okay with that. And I absolutely was okay with that. I was more invested in how this was going to make me feel than how the movie was stimulating me to think about that metaphor. I was less interested in that. It was clear as day, and I liked the way it made me feel. And we should also, be clear that this movie is speculating that the death was due to, I guess it was some variation of the bubonic plague, if I'm not mistaken. But that was essentially what caused this. But I do think that sacrificial act is quite terrific as what it means for fathers and sons, and young sons who feel like they must have a need to protect the family when their father is just for a moment not around, out working in this case. But yeah, the whole metaphor of what it means for these twins to take each other's place, obvious, but felt. And that's what matters.
Yeah, I mean, the death scene, and maybe we should just go straight to that because that's a big part of what you're talking about. The switching, the twin connection, if you will, and how that plays into Hamnet's choices in this film. Again, I don't even know if there are words to describe it. The visceral reaction I had to that moment, dude.
I like hearing you try.
The only way I can describe, I don't know if I can. I was undone, just totally undone. And part of it was the sacrifice that you're talking about and the beauty of that gesture. He just wanted to take away the pain of his sister, who was beginning to succumb to that plague.
Yeah.
And he was willing to take that sickness from her, knowing that it might kill him, but he was willing to take it. And I love that moment when he makes that choice, and then Chloé Zhao takes us away from the reality of it and plants us into this purgatory state where Hamnet is trying to figure out where he is. And he starts calling out to his mother, which that in and of itself is
the
killer.
whistle. The whistle.
It is
Yeah.
so heartbreaking. And then it cuts to Anne, who is desperately trying to save her son with every ounce of energy that she has, and losing hope more and more by the second. The visuals there as she holds him close, they are forever seared into my soul. The scream and the immediacy of it is one thing, but what really broke me was the quiet stillness and the aftermath of the scream.
Yeah, I'm with you, man.
Like, she couldn't fathom that this was now her new reality.
Yeah.
That
it's the moment
really
of shock.
did a number on
Yeah.
me. The shock there. That, to me, that's where Buckley really shines, in that moment post the actual death. The urgency, that's where the quote unquote loudness of her performance, I think, is really felt. Like, because she had already done this with Judas. The sense of urgency did begin to manifest itself as Judith started to recover, but it wasn't working for Hamnet. And as I noted, that urgency then turns into this hopelessness, and that in Buckley's performance is really great. But once it transforms into that stillness, it just takes her performance to a new level. And if that wasn't heartbreaking enough, we get the moment with Judas right afterward where she wanted to see Hamnet, as he lays there on the table. A striking moment in this film, especially because of how it contrasts to Anne when she was a little girl and her experience watching her mom die. That had a huge role in why she allowed Judith to become part of this moment.
Those parallels, that whole there's a lot of full circling happening in this movie.
Yes. And then we get to William. And this is gonna be the hardest part of this whole moment here.
Do you need a break?
I don't know.
Do you need me to interject for a little bit to comment on a few things?
William, who, as you noted, he was away. He was in London.
Yeah.
And that's part of why Hamnet decided to take on this responsibility. And I do love that moment, that scene between the two of them, where he asked Hamnet to be brave.
Yeah.
To essentially be the man of the house while he's gone. And so he takes on the sacrifice. It eventually leads to his death. And he is gone, but he's trying to get back home. And he's too late. And by the time he gets there and he has that one-on-one moment and you get that close-up, and this is what I love about Chloé Zhao as a filmmaker too, because the scene is wonderfully lit. It's dour. There's a sorrow to the cinematography, but there isn't anything happening with the camera that is distracting. She simply lets the actors carry the weight of the moment, and that close-up on Paul Mescal. And there is something about him as a performer and how he can tap into sorrow in this way that's overwhelming, that obviously exhibits grief, but also this sense of lostness. And that is important to the rest of this conversation as we talk about the ending to this film. But in a lot of ways, it begins in this moment, and how he's able to denote that in his performance. That specific duality is striking. And then he says the words,
"Oh, here it comes, JD.
It's my boy."
Good luck. Good luck. Oh, you made it. Good job. Good job.
That line is the 2025 version of "I can't beat it." That's going to be a line that lingers with me for a long, long time. I was already devastated by Buckley and what she brings to this whole scene. The moment with Judith, I thought was breathtaking. And that line from Paul Mescal and the way he delivers that line, I didn't pause the movie, but I was close. I almost felt like I needed to just have a moment to catch my breath because I couldn't. I was so gobsmacked by the emotional potency of the moment and that line delivery. It was just incredible.
Well, there's two things about that line delivery I love so much. On one hand, it is Paul Mescal's delivery of it, and the fact that it's not really a traditional form of catharsis. It's actually very quiet.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the movie is setting you up for a moment of real visceral catharsis, and then it just cuts to black. And then we edit to what feels like maybe sometime later. And the movie has that kind of editing style, which I actually think is an asset to the movie. And I do want to call out the editors here, which includes one, Chloé Zhao, alongside Alfonso Goncalves, or Goncalves. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. But I do think the editing is a huge component as to why that scene also works. Because it feels like it's setting you up for some moment of traditional catharsis, only to then make it seem like it's never ending, right? The way the editing style works here, it's almost as if to suggest that these feelings of grief just don't go away. They're always lingering. There's almost like a ghostly quality to this movie because of the editing style. And I do think that's absolutely an asset here. I do want to also comment on that whole purgatorial-like state that Hamnet finds himself in before he officially passes away. It ironically looks very much like a stage. So again, obvious foreshadowing, but it's definitely something that's designed to make you feel, and you certainly do feel something. And to maybe add a little bit of a lighthearted component to this conversation, because JD's the emotional one, I'm here to add a little bit of levity, I guess. And this is not a knock. It's just something I thought about because this is also an Amblin Entertainment production, which is very much, a Spielberg thing. Spielberg, as well as Sam Mendes, are co-producers on this movie. And the whole exchange, the swapping of places, if you will, between Judith and Hamnet, very much reminded me of E.T., the classic scene of E.T. and Elliot. I was constantly thinking about that. But it's like, in a way, it's actually something I like about the movie because as small scale as it seems, there's also something very traditional about it. It feels very old fashioned at the same time. And I kind of like that it's going for that kind of old fashioned emotional tropiness, if you will. And I like when movies do that and it feels earnest. Like I kind of miss those qualities.
Yeah, and I think that's where Jacoby Jupe is just phenomenal and how he brings so much credence to it because the trope itself isn't all that sophisticated. And I don't think the writing is extremely nuanced or dense in a sentiment to value kind of way, as we noted earlier.
Yeah.
But the emotionality of it and the emotional truth, more specifically of the moment, I do think is dazzling because of what Jupe brings to Hamnet and why he makes that choice. Yeah. He sees his sister on his deathbed. And again, that's why I go back to the visual storytelling here. This film is not going to win awards for screenplay, but the cinematography here, I think, is phenomenal. And Chloé Zhao's approach to this film from a visual perspective to tell this story is what's important. Because on the page, it's not going to read as Hamnet looks and sees Judith on her deathbed and goes on a monologue about it. And that's why we feel it. That's not what's happening here. And in a lot of ways, it has nothing to do with what's written on the page, at least in terms of verbal dialogue, where the screenplay is brilliant, I think, is in that simplicity. Hamnet looks at the death or at his sister on his deathbed, feels something for her, gets in bed with her, probably knowing the consequences of what could happen to him. That alone is an incredible gesture, but then goes the extra step to say, I'm going to, like, almost speaking in a supernatural way of, let me have the illness. Yeah. Take it from her, give it to me. And then, of course, Chloé Zhao elicits that further with more visual storytelling, and then we get the purgatory-like state as we talked about a second ago as well. So, like, to me, it's how she tells this story visually and letting the performance carry that. Because Jacoby Jupe, as simple as that is, that's where the nuance really lies, and it is stunning. Like the emotional truth to it, I found dazzling.
Since you're talking about it, can I get into my one minor criticism with the movie now, just to get out of the way, because I feel like it's connected to what you were just talking about, just so we can maybe move on from it. I didn't always love the cinematography here. That was maybe my one thing about it that was a little bit reserved. Although I will agree, when it's focused on close-ups and small-scale rooms, I do think it is very successful. We should also note that the cinematographer here is Lucas Zal, who is, I think this is his first time working with Chloé Zhao, if I'm not mistaken. But this cinematographer has been mostly working with the likes of Pavel Polakorsky, movies like Ida and Cold War, for instance. And
the Zone of Interest. Yeah.
The Zone of Interest as well. And his style is very static, very blocky in a way. And there are times here, especially during some of the more outdoorsy and grander sequences, I admittedly did miss some of the more fluttering aspects of someone like Joshua James's Richards cinematography from movies like The Rider. And I think there are some sequences here that maybe could have benefited from a more sweeping kind of scale outside of those examples that do focus on internalized close-ups. I think the whole sequence in the middle that we keep referencing here, that we're spending a lot of time on, Hamnet's death, I do think that is well shot. That whole sequence is well shot, and it's rightfully well shot. Some of the stuff before and after, I do wish was a little bit more sweeping, and that's maybe my only reservation about the movie. I guess maybe just selfishly, I kind of miss the almost Malickian floatiness that populated some of her earlier films, and I actually think it could have benefited this movie.
Okay. I mean, that very much did not bother me. I thought it was extremely well shot all around, but the film primarily takes place indoors anyway, or on the stage, as we see at the end of the film.
That's fair.
And I love the cinematography here, and maybe less so with how it might function as a painterly frame. That's less of a concern for me, as much as what's happening in the frame, if that makes sense.
Makes sense.
Because this is a film built on visual storytelling and not a dense, thick screenplay. And what's happening in the frame, I think, is captured gorgeously. Like, I didn't need it to necessarily have that painterly Malickian aesthetic, although I very much appreciate it. Obviously, I'm a huge fan. For those longtime listeners anyway, Malick is absolutely one of my favorites. So if you want to tap into your Malickian sensibility whenever you want to, and this is across the board, I don't care what filmmaker or cinematographer you are, I am totally on board for that at all times.
Even when you're completely ripping it off, like a movie like The Dig on Netflix from some years ago.
Exactly. I'm very much okay with it. Yes. Tap into your inner Terrence Malick. I am all for it.
Is that a new t-shirt design for us, JD? Tap into your inner Malick?
Maybe. I might have to mock that up. However, it's not always necessary, and I don't know if this film really needed that. I would have absolutely went for it, but I think the cinematography, as far as it capturing what the characters are doing and why they're doing what they're doing, that's all there. And I think it's all captured with a gracefulness that mirrors the emotional underbelly of the film. And that's really all that mattered to me, especially when you couple it with Max Richter's score. And we could talk about that later as well. But I think the score, with what's captured in frame, again, allowing the performers to really carry the weight of this story, and again, some of that visual symbolism and foreshadowing, that's all that I needed. I didn't need it to be Malickian, personally.
And that's fair. And like I said, this could just be a a selfish thing on my part because I just love that style that Chloe Zhao is known for. And even a movie like Eternals, which was shot by someone different, if I'm not mistaken, still kind of had that. And you and I are two people that will go to bat for Eternals. We actually quite like that movie. As flawed as it is, it's at least interesting, and we really commend Marvel for taking an interesting swing with that one and letting Chloe Zhao really do some weird, wonky things that were not really par for the course for the Marvel Cinematic Universe at that time. And I do think, at least at the very least, I would have been curious to see how maybe that fluttering style would have complemented this movie. I don't know if it would have been better, but given that this does have a bit of an old-fashioned emotional quality to it, maybe some components that were a bit more visually sweeping could have worked for me a little bit more. I don't know. I'd be curious to see what that is, but it was something that I was thinking about.
I also just wonder how distracting that could have been to this story as well.
That's fair.
Because again, as I noted earlier, I love that the camera does not become center of attention. I definitely did not need that in this case.
It barely ever moves. In fact, the only times that it really moves, it actually kind of gave me a Robert Eggers like vibe, like where it was like slowly panning to something that was meant to take your breath away. Those are really the only times the camera ever actually moves. Otherwise, it's very static. It pretty much remains in one place.
It would not surprise me at all. I don't know if this is true. I have not read any interviews around this yet. I'm sure I will soon. But it would not surprise me if Chloé Zhao and Lucas Zhao began with that aesthetic style and then realized early on that it was becoming a distraction, that it wasn't working, and reset themselves. Because I think the two of them have proven in their work that it's something that they can capture, and they can capture it very well. So I don't know. I'd be curious to know what their approach was. But either way, I'm glad that it isn't here in this case. I think there's a world where that's just an utter distraction from the emotional underbelly of the film, and that is the star of the show. So I think what they captured anyway is already,
it's not bad.
great.
Yeah, it's good for the most part, it is quite good.
Yeah. So I'm perfectly okay with letting the performers be the star and the emotional weight of the film kind of be center of attention. And given the weight of it all and what was at stake, which obviously from a narrative perspective is literal life and death, I do like that the film's thematic and emotional underbelly is front and center there. Kind of, I guess, bouncing off of that, can we veer toward the ending of this?
Yeah, I was just going to say we should make our way towards the ending now. I think that's a good transitional point.
I do want to talk about the ending of this film and how it informs the film's themes, because I think it's absolutely breathtaking. And as we noted earlier, even if it's invented for this film, I deeply, deeply love the ending scenes and how it recontextualizes what Hamlet means for William as a means of coping. Because on one hand, he is devastated to lose his son. And to make matters worse, Anne has distanced herself from him as well. So
basically blames him for it.
Yeah. Art becomes his only outlet, his only way to articulate all of these complicated emotions that are swirling in him, which is so fascinating here because the film doesn't remold Hamlet into something that fits this story. On its face, it doesn't seem to reflect the events we see here at all. But Hamlet being one of Shakespeare's most interpreted plays, it's easy to see how you could take certain sections of it and apply it to William's grief. And this is what makes art so vital in our lives, and especially to the artist who create such vivid emotional art. Because there's a scene where William tells Anne that he's still in disbelief, that it's like Hamnet is just lost, that William is searching for him. That maybe Hamnet is just lost and we have to find him. In fact, I think Anne mutters at one point that he can't just have vanished, which is why the purgatory visuals here are so evocative, because it's indicative of that idea that Hamnet is in some space in between life and death. That's where William is looking for him, and it's where Hamlet, the play, is born out of. He won't be able to find Hamnet in the real world anymore, but he can find Hamnet in the art, and it becomes so deeply personal to him by the end of this film, which is why William's to be or not to be moment here is so devastating, because it's not just a cameo, it's William so lost in his grief that he considers mimicking Hamlet as he stands there on the edge of the cliff. It's also William becoming a character in the play where he gets to have a one-on-one moment with Hamlet, finally getting closure as he gets to say goodbye since he wasn't there when it happened. Something that is remarkably poignant on its own terms, but even more provocative given that Anne has no idea that William was writing this tragedy in the first place. When she arrives or when she gets the flyer, she is blindsided by it and almost doesn't know how to respond. I just absolutely love how in those final scenes, they are both deeply impacted by the art on an individual basis, because Anne also gets her one-on-one interaction with Hamlet, reaching out to the actor on stage with her hand, which is going to end up becoming an iconic image from this film. But despite their distancing of each other, it also becomes this moment of mutual catharsis, particularly when Anne quietly whispers, "Look at me," toward William as he's there on stage performing. And before William gets to being off stage, he turns around and he does make eye contact with her, and it's one of the best moments of this film. I was absolutely floored by how all of that unfolds.
I love so much of what Chloé Zhao is doing to treat this ending as an emotional priority than anything else, because this was the moment that I was so nervous about. We get a moment early on in the movie, this meet cute of sorts between Anne and Will, or Agnes and Will, and in this scene he tells her a story, a Greek mythology story of Orpheus and Eurydice, and it's very clear that this story is somehow maybe a parallel to Romeo and Juliet. And of course, this meet cute, this romance of sorts, is then what's going to inspire a little line from Romeo and Juliet in the next scene. I was so worried that this movie could potentially turn into some version of Leonardo DiCaprio's Rick Dalton, that whole meme of pointing at the screen. Oh, there's a Shakespeare reference. Oh, there's a Shakespeare reference. Almost as if this was going to treat the work of William Shakespeare as, like, I don't know, how the Marvel Cinematic Universe does fan service, right? Like, I was kind of worried that when we got to the actual production of Hamlet, we were going to get some grand revelation as to, oh, this is how it relates to their now dead son. But it's not really that clear. It's actually very gradual and very soft and simple, and you can kind of internalize it in a variety of ways. It's more so about the reconciliation of how this art was this coping mechanism for now two individuals, two parents specifically. This idea that the whole idea that Hamlet's father in this play was murdered was almost William's own way of admitting that he feels like his absence is what murdered his own son. And the fact that he plays the ghost on stage, you can internalize it that way, but the movie doesn't treat it as a, oh, now I get it type moment, which I really do respect. That's, for as old fashioned and, dare I say, kind of schmaltzy the material is, the ending is surprisingly sophisticated, and I really did appreciate that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think maybe the best way to articulate how I feel about that ending as it relates to these ideas, these themes that we've been talking about here. In fact, it's not even me that's articulating it, but I want to read it because I think it perfectly summates what I was experiencing and what I was feeling.
Okay.
And this is from David Ehrlich at IndieWire.
Okay.
This is how he ends his review. Quote, just as Hamlet begs Horatio to live on and tell his story, Hamlet finds Will pleading with Hamnet to do the same. This tragedy may not be the fate that either the playwright or his wife ever wanted to imagine for their only son, but his story was never theirs to tell, nor could it ever hope to mean as much to anyone else. Because of Hamlet, this angel-faced little boy will die again 1,000,000 times over for centuries to come. But in that sleep of death and what dreams may come, he will be reborn just as often, his memory rendered eternal across a more brilliant future than even William Shakespeare could have written for him. End quote. I was floored by that. I wholeheartedly felt that there from David, and it very much speaks to how I feel about this film, what we see there at the end with those sophistications, and that final shot of the film. It becomes this incredible crystallization of two parents coming at it from ultimately different perspectives. And what I love about Anne is that, again, she was there, she experienced it in this visceral way. And I want to highlight this in a little bit because there's one key element to this film we haven't talked about yet. And I want to get to that here in a moment.
Sure.
But the fact that she was holding Hamlet as he died, I think is such a key visual to this film. Again, going back to that conversation. And again, what I love about the camera work here and the simplicity of it, but that image, how it leads to ultimately the conflict that she has with William. And you noted a moment ago there that a lot of the conflict between them simply comes down to the fact that Will was gone. He just wasn't there.
Right.
And as a result, she doesn't think that William can understand what grief is doing to her. And she, on the same token, cannot see what grief has done to William. She thinks that it's absent in him because he was gone. And obviously that's not the case.
Right.
So there is a disconnect. In fact, one of the more heartbreaking scenes of the film, I think, is when they are together and she starts to read his palm and he asks her, "What do you see?" And she replies with nothing.
Yeah.
And his reaction to it, I think, is heartbreaking because it's when he realizes that there's nothing that can happen between the two of them in that moment, verbally or otherwise, that's ever going to regain that connection. The only way to communicate with her is now through the art. Going back to that fundamental idea that we talked about at the beginning of this conversation and how art becomes this
kind of funny.
coping mechanism.
This basically is the same ending as Sentimental Value, isn't it?
In a lot of ways, it is.
Yeah.
And again, I think what's interesting, and to tie this back to what you were just talking about in relation to Hamlet, and also the way David Ehrlich also regurgitates some of what you were saying there, I think it's fascinating that this film, and I didn't mention this earlier, that it doesn't remold Hamlet to what we see here.
Right.
Hamlet is still Hamlet. And on its face, it's very different than what you would think, given that it might have been inspired by the death of their son. There is a bit of a disconnect, but the way that this film tries to interpret certain elements of that play to the grief that William was experiencing, that then goes on to have this profound impact on Anne as well,
Yeah.
I think is quite fascinating. And then you circle that to the idea of Hamnet, again, with Hamlet, also the character of Hamlet in the play, and the film also, to bring context at the very beginning, it denotes that Hamnet and Hamlet are the same name at that time.
Yeah.
So her hearing the name Hamlet, seeing a character named Hamlet, aka Hamnet, on stage, she's so confused. I think that's such a fascinating concept here. This doesn't seem to be about my life. It doesn't seem to be about the death of my son at all. But there are these little intricacies. There are little ways to interpret William kind of sneaking in his grief into that play in these fascinating ways. That is what this film focuses on. That's what's so fascinating about the character of William here, Paul Mescal, on the edge there doing the to be or not to be speech. It is recontextualized in this fascinating way. Or with what we see at the end of the film with Noah Jupe, who comes in. Noah Jupe, obviously related to Jacoby Jupe, playing Hamlet on stage. Again, dying, being reborn in a sense, with that final shot that you see at the end of the film. Like, how all of that comes together. Again, not with what's on the page. What's on the page is great, but it is the visual storytelling for me. That to me is what's exquisite. That's what's evocative. That to me is where so much of the pathos comes from. And that final 25 minutes, I think, is utter perfection. I know some people might disagree with the music choice at the end. We could talk about that.
We'll talk about it. I have thoughts.
Just in terms of the storytelling, though, and the pathos of this film and what its central nucleus is. I don't want to get distracted by that quite yet.
Yeah.
That, I think, is utter perfection.
Yeah. What I also like about it, too, is that in a way it almost acts as a visual essay of sorts as to why William Shakespeare's plays have been so timeless and adaptable over centuries, because it basically preserves the original intent of Hamlet by also finding a way to reinterpret it and recontextualize it, as you said, for William Shakespeare himself and for these individual people. But it doesn't change the play. It doesn't say that maybe the play started out as a certain way and it maybe shifted to what we know it as now. But instead, it says that the play has always been this thing, but it allows us and leaves us room to interpret it in the ways that we need it to, right? Like, so in a way, it becomes kind of a description of what William Shakespeare's work is all about and why people celebrate him. So it's able to have its cake and eat it too by preserving the legacy of William Shakespeare, but also working for this particular iteration of William Shakespeare and Agnes. So it's able to do all of those things very well. And that whole moment of everyone in this theater essentially getting to feel Agnes's pain and share that with her for just a brief moment. Yeah, it's very well done. It is very well felt.
Yeah, I deeply love it. Again, I don't care about the obviousness of the symbolism. And maybe it just comes down to the broad idea. And maybe this is an excuse. I don't know. But I'm willing to excuse the obviousness of it because the grief is obviously overwhelming to her. Even as time passes on. And it's very clear that once we get past the death, and you noted that the editing here is a vital component, and once Mescal says, "It's my boy," and we have that great moment, we cut to black, time has moved on. It's been some time, years perhaps, and she is still as crushed as ever.
Yeah.
And it's in that moment we get that sequence I just talked about where she tries to read his palm and she says there's nothing there. So there's very much a disconnect there. So there's something about that heftiness, the soul crushing weight that she is still carrying, and that disconnect with William to the point where there really is no relationship there anymore. and she shows up on the set, is a little interested that he's living in some sort of attic, despite the fact that he has this huge mansion in the countryside. Goes to the play, is a little bit confused, and then ultimately goes on to have this profound experience. And again, I love the duality that with William and Anne, their emotional evolution happens individually and together simultaneously.
Sure.
And the way Chloé Zhao allows that to take place, I think is just, it's elegant storytelling at its very best. And you get that ending shot there again with Jacoby Jupe coming back into the fold, and
this movie
killed me, dude.
Again, is it metaphorically obvious? Yes. But it's also not simple. Like this movie does understand that just because something isn't complicated, or I should say, just because something isn't subtle, doesn't mean it's not complicated, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I add to that?
Absolutely.
Nuance a little bit?
Yeah.
Because I haven't seen this being talked about enough. Because while this film is about grief, it is about art as a coping mechanism, as a way to find healing. And I love all of that, obviously. But this is also a movie about life. And I don't think that can be forgotten here. For a movie about grief and loss, I was awestruck by how devoted this film is to life and love. It's not a revelatory duality by any means, but the execution of that here, I do think is important. Sometimes it's on a minor scale. I love how that idea trickles down to Anne's hawk. This relationship she has with the animal that we see quite a bit at the beginning of the film. It is defining to her in some ways early on, and it becomes a powerful symbolic image later on in the film. After it passes, we get that moment there. They have the funeral for the hawk. There was this nice little poignant moment. And what Anne tells to Hamnet there becomes symbolically vital once we get to his death scene. But on a much more intense scale, I think about the birth of Hamnet and Judith, especially because giving birth in those days had such high life or death stakes, which this film exhibits with Anne's flashback to her own mother, which we somewhat noted a moment ago. And in that flashback, we see that her mother had sadly passed away at childbirth when she was just a child. It's a devastating sequence in its own right. So with that on her mind, once Hamnet was born and he was the first of that sequence, she realized that there was a second baby on the way, and there is panic that begins to manifest in Anne. And what she demonstrates there, I think, is extremely understandable given the context that Chloé Zhao gives us. And once again, Buckley is just ravishing. But Judith is soon born, and she is motionless. It appears to be further heartbreak for Anne, only for a miracle to take place. And Anne is given life. It is incredible dramatic irony given how it's the other side of the coin to
again twins swapping places.
And to emphasize that polarity further, I deeply love the visual. Again, I want to emphasize this again, the visual that in both cases, for Judith at birth and Hamnet at death, they took place in Anne's arms. She was there to cherish and love and grieve through it all. As far as duality goes in cinema, very few will ever top that for me. And again, while the film does get grim later on, of course, I really appreciate the way it gives life to the Shakespeares. The joy on Anne's face as Judith comes alive, I think is noteworthy here. I think it is really quite noteworthy. And there are also so many scenes that follow the birthing sequence before we get to Hamnet's death that fervently exhibit the ebulliency and connective tissue to the family and how close they are. The Macbeth recreation, for example, was really charming. And similarly to what you said about Romeo and Juliet, I don't find it distracting. I don't find it to be like a marvelization of this character or of this film. I don't think it calls attention to it at all.
I agree.
We also see the goodbye to William in the street that was so delightful. And the moment right after where little Hamnet was in tears because his father just had to leave. And it leads to an adorable moment where Anne comforts him as she reads his poem, and he talks about how he's going to be this great swordsman in one of his dad's plays one day, which, of course, further dramatic irony there, but emotionally, it's a great moment between a mother and a son. So the film very much wants to emphasize life and the importance of that, and why it obviously leads to the emotionality we see early on. And I love that this film is devoted to showing us both sides of that coin. It's easy to get caught up in the grief because that's
louder. That's the less subtle aspect of it. Yeah,
absolutely. But that mirroring effect, especially the birthing scene with Judith going from death to life, I think is honestly one of the key scenes here.
It's a celebratory film, and it does end on its own version of a celebratory note. What it can do, it does have a hopeful conclusion in that regard. At least it implies one. It doesn't necessarily confirm one, but it certainly implies that that's the message and the moral it wants us to take away from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, when you circle that to art and how our kids can live on through our art, I love the power of that with Hamlet, even if it's somewhat invented. I don't care. Like, I don't care because, like, given what this film is trying to do on its own terms, I think the thematic idea there is captivating. And
I mean, it's a human thing. One of the things I also love about this movie is that the way that these characters sometimes talk to each other, the universality of their story of a struggling artist with a family. I mean, there is something also contemporary about this story. So it's perfectly fine to infer or imply that maybe William Shakespeare utilized aspects of his real life to fuel his art, just like Steven Spielberg did with his family's divorce, his parents' divorce. Like that's not outside the realm of human nature. And,
of course,
like that's what this movie's implying. So I don't care if it's true or not. Like this, it's not a historical document.
Yeah, and that's why I thought a lot about the Fabelmans here as much as I did First Man. Yeah, it's kind of a concoction of both of those movies in a lot of ways.
It actually is. They're great companion pieces for sure.
Should we talk about Max Richter?
Let's talk about it. I think we can round out the conversation with this. Because there's been a lot of dialogue about his score. Not his score. There's been a lot of dialogue around a certain song choice, I'll simply say.
Yeah, which I think is crazy because this film is 2 hours long. Okay? 2 hours long. I know you know because we're talking about it. We have seen the film.
Yeah.
But for those listening, and I guess by now we've talked a lot.
We've already spoiled the movie.
I imagine most people have seen this film.
Let's talk about the greatest song of all time, On the Nature of Daylight.
Yeah, like a film that is 2 hours and 6 minutes, something like that. This score track does not show up until about the 2 hour mark. It is literally the last 2 minutes of the movie. I understand that it has been played in several films by now, and maybe it's a bit overdone, but I just cannot find the energy to lose my mind over a score that is so excellent on its own terms, that is evocative and moving away from On the Nature of Daylight, to forgo that, to not even talk about that, but one track that plays at the 2 hour mark. I'm sorry, that's way overblown. It's way overblown.
It's the the fact that this familiar song that has been utilized quite a bit already is doing it happens at a pivotal moment in the movie. I think that really is the talking point. The thing here is that I feel like with the case of this song and its utilization here, all things can be true for me at the same time. Like on one hand, is it utilized well in this movie? Yes, it is. I actually think it's utilized well, and it does complement the scene quite well. Is the song itself becoming dangerously overplayed? Yeah, it kind of is. It's kind of falling into that like Hotel California or Stairway to Heaven kind of category for classic rock, where you know it's great, but you're hearing it all the time. At the same time, will I say that would I may have been more interested in hearing a different piece over top of that ending? Yeah, maybe. Like I think if anything, it's really just it's not the utilization in the movie that's the problem. It's just the simple association with it. And I don't think that's fair to knock the movie because of that association. We've just been lucky to get great pieces of art and mediums like Arrival, Shutter Island, or that one episode of The Last of Us that utilize this piece so effectively that so much of us just can't separate that utilization from how it's going to be utilized again. The association is simply where the problem is. And that's not a knock on the movie, because simultaneously, while I think I may have preferred to hear something different there, I also can acknowledge that I think it's still utilized well here. I think it's well placed.
Yeah.
So it's like, I think all things can be true in this case.
I mostly still associate that track with Arrival.
Mhm.
I think of all the utilizations of it in film, that's the best case of it. And
Perhaps. Yeah.
it is vital to that film. It plays at least twice, if I recall. It's been a
It
few
is
years
twice.
since I've seen
It
the film.
bookends the movie, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. So it's used twice there, and I think it is utilized to perfection in Arrival. I don't have an issue with it here. As I noted, I think the criticisms are way overblown. It is the last 2 minutes of a 2+ hour movie. I'm sorry, but getting distracted by that, I think, is a little myopic, perhaps. But I will say this. If I had to criticize it, I would say that it is wholly unnecessary. And the reason I say that is because I think the film had already done the work.
Yeah.
It could have been a silent scene and it would have been equally as impactful. I was not even paying attention to it. I recognize it, obviously, because we all know it very well. But in the moment, I was way more invested in Jessie Buckley. I was way more invested in Paul Mescal and the emotional evolution of their characters for all the reasons we just laid out. The track to me was just a cherry on top. It was literally the last thing on my mind.
It does kind of seem as though, and this is maybe going to make it sound like I'm negative on the utilization here. I'm really not, because it still technically works in the moment. But at the same time, it does kind of sound as if a producer came on set midway through and realized, oh, crap, Max Richter's scoring this movie. Well, here's my note. You're putting on The Nature of Daylight at the end.
Yeah.
Like, it's almost like a producer came in.
It could have been that. And again, like, I think maybe that's why it's unnecessary. I don't know if you've listened to the score outside of the film.
I haven't listened to it outside of the film, but I was paying attention to it while watching the movie. And the score itself is, on one hand, it's vastly different than On the Nature of Daylight. And it's also very good. So if anything...
That's what I mean. Like, the score here is ravishing. If you listen to the score on Apple Music or Spotify, do yourself a favor. It is incredible. Max Richter, what he brings to this film is phenomenal. That to me is, again, why I don't have an issue with what they ultimately choose there. On the Nature of Daylight, it is an astounding track. It is simply an all-timer. I understand why a lot of producers, filmmakers want to use it. I do think it is effective here in a vacuum, but on the same token, you have Max Richter delivering a score like that, and you go back to something he's done before. Why? To me, it was unnecessary. If I had a criticism of it, it's that he was already giving you A+ work. Just continue that.
Well, that's my criticism as well. If I were to try to look at this more objectively, it's also that I think the piece itself, On the Nature of Daylight, sonically, musically, melodically, stylistically, it does feel a little different than the actual score for this movie. So even if you don't know the song, stylistically, it is kind of different. So that could be distracting to the general music lover who goes to see this movie then.
And I don't think it's a driver of that scene. I really don't. At least if you're invested in the film. Now, if you're not on the film's wavelength, then I can see why it would be even more distracting. But if you're invested in this film, it is, like I said, it's a cherry on top. It is the last layer. It is the least important element of that whole sequence. It is Buckley, it's Mescal, it's Jupe, who also shows up in that last sequence, who is, again, to see his face again, that young boy in this film is so freaking good. Like, him coming back, the emotional wallop of that scene, which the film had done the work to manifest that wallop. It had nothing to do with the music.
Yeah,
the music is just a cherry. The film rendered that emotional wallop, not the music. It's not On the Nature of Daylight.
No, you hit on a great point there, I think. And this is speaking to any criticism out there that's pointing their critical finger at On the Nature of Daylight as opposed to something else. If the movie doesn't work for you, that's perfectly fine. Not every movie works for everyone. But if you're pointing at this song as the reason why that ending doesn't work, that's more speaking about that's more speaking to the fact that the movie wasn't working for you. So call it like it is. Call it like it is. Don't blame the song on that. That's not the song isn't the reason why the movie didn't work for you. Be a better critic, find words as to why the movie didn't work for you, and find other examples as to the obvious elephant in the room. Like it's more to it than just that.
If you're eating a piece of cake and you're saying that this is a bad piece of cake because of the cherry on top, I have news for you. I have news for you. You don't like the cake. That's okay.
And that's fine. That's fine.
That's okay.
Not everyone likes cake. Maybe you like pie instead.
It's okay. We all have different types of cake that we like. And that's okay if you don't like this type of cake. That's okay. But don't blame it on the cherry. Let's be honest. Let's just be honest about it.
That may be the greatest analogy we've ever had on the In Session Film podcast.
So that's okay. Let's just be real about what's actually happening here. That's all that I'm asking for.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I'm absolutely with you.
The score is great though. The original score here by Max Richter is just phenomenal.
I agree. I'm with you, and I wish the focus was more on that.
I guess as we wind down here, I just want to reiterate once again, I think Jessie Buckley is out of her mind good.
She's always been.
She's she breaks my heart. It is phenomenal. And again, there's going to be elements to the performance, especially during the death scene, that'll feel heightened. But I think it's necessarily heightened in a way there. But I was really more struck by those moments of stillness. And again, in the back half of the film, that detachment, that coldness that she has on her performance, that then gives way to the warmth that we see at the end of the film. Is just incredible. Easily one of the best actress performances of the year. And as far as Paul Mescal goes, look, it is easy to get caught up in the hype of this film and the greatness of it. What he does in After Sun is just as good as what he does here. Let's be real. Let's be honest. This isn't necessarily a revelation or, oh my God, Paul Mescal is so much better here than anything he's ever done. Let's relax on that. That's, again, if I have to speak to the discourse once again, let's calm down. Paul Mescal gives maybe one of the best actor performances of the year. I can certainly engage in that conversation, but it's not necessarily better than After Sun.
No, it's I think that if we're going to pick one actor from this movie that we should be talking about, I mean, for me, it's Jacoby Jupe. But if we're going to be focusing on one of the two, quote unquote, leads, I think this might be more revelatory work for Jessie Buckley. But we've seen Paul Mescal deliver work like this before. I would certainly take his performance in After Sun over this, which is not a knock on this performance, but I get the the narrative around his work in that movie. I think speaks louder than it does here. I'll simply say.
I mean, I think he is excellent here. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
I think he's really, really, really great. I just have seen a lot of people claiming that, oh my God, this is easily his best work.
No,
It's among his best work, perhaps, but I don't think it's necessarily better than After Sun. To me, that is still best of the decade kind of stuff. I don't know if I would go that far here, but I do think this is best of the year kind of stuff. Certainly in that conversation at the very least.
Mm-hmm.
But I agree with you. Like, aside from those two, and we expect those two to be great, Jacoby Jupe, though, it's a stunning performance.
It's almost phenomenal work. It's almost the performance of the year for me. Like I'm almost tempted to say that, but then again, I think a lot of that is due to the circumstances and how that character is framed and how he's utilized here.
Yeah.
But he certainly takes advantage of that, and he's up for the challenge.
Oh, for sure. And again, I think it's like a lot of it is through that pragmatic visual storytelling. Symbolic approach this film has, where he just thrives in that, at least under the context of what this film is aiming to do.
Mm-hmm.
And man, he knocks it out of the park. He's so good here.
He's good.
Really great.
Good movie.
Anything else? I think we've pretty much covered it here.
We've been going for about an hour and a half, dude. I think we're good.
Yeah. I mean, I could talk about this film forever. I really love it a lot. I was floored by it. Again, I haven't had an emotional response like this since at least First Man in 2018. I was locked in my office, and for good reason, because I was audibly sobbing. I was undone by this film.
Well, I think I know what your favorite movie of the year is so far.
I haven't done that exercise yet, so I don't know. But it's up there. It's going to be in the conversation.
First Man was among the top 10 of the decade for you. So to make the comparison to First Man, I think that's saying a lot, whether you know it or not.
Yeah. I don't know. I haven't done the ranking yet, at least with Hamnet. I don't know. We'll see where it lands, because the top end of this year there's a lot of great films to choose from. So we'll see.
Oh, the second half of the year has certainly been better than the first half.
Oh,
we were worried for a while.
Yeah, for sure. But it's delivering. The back half is delivering. That's very exciting.
Welcome to Hollywood, I guess.
I know. All right. If you agree or disagree with anything we had to say here, you can leave a comment below. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, hit us up. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky. You can always email us insessionfilm@gmail.com. With that said, we have a second review coming this week as well. We are going to be talking about Richard Linklater's new film, Nouvelle Vague. And on the main show this week, what are we talking about on the main show?
Oh, we're going to do something music related, inspired by the upcoming Wicked for Good. I think we decided to settle on top 5 musical duets in movies. Kind of focusing on the idea of that great pairing between Glinda and Elphaba. Let's talk about duets specifically.
Yeah, that'll be fun. I look forward to getting into that as well. A new Women in Session at the end of the week, and a new Chasing Gold. So you can be on the lookout for all of that. With that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Chloé Zhao.
You made it through that one pretty well, Jude. Unscathed.